You're listening to The Night Watchman, where the stories may sound fictional, but the fear feels real. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now turn off the lights, lock your doors, and don't stop listening. The first thing I noticed about room 17 was that the door was already open. It was 2:13 in the morning. I remember that exact time because I had just looked at the clock on the front desk. I was working the night shift at a small roadside motel in northern Pennsylvania called the Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. It wasn't a fancy place. 22 rooms, a cracked swimming pool nobody used anymore, a faded neon sign that buzzed whenever it rained, and a long parking lot surrounded by trees. Most nights nothing happened. People checked in, people checked out. Truck drivers slept for a few hours. Families stopped for the night, and I spent 8 hours behind the front desk watching old movies on a tiny television. I had taken the job because I needed money. My mother had passed away 6 months earlier, and after that, everything in my life had started falling apart. So when my cousin offered me the night clerk position at Pine Hollow, I accepted. I didn't care that the motel was old. I didn't care that it was almost an hour from the nearest city. I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could forget. At least that's what I thought. Because 3 weeks after I started working there, I discovered something about room 17. Something the owner had never told me. And once I learned what had happened inside that room, I understood why nobody ever stayed there for more than one night. The motel owner was a man named Walter Hayes. He was 71 years old, always wore the same brown jacket, and had a habit of smoking cigarettes even though he'd promised his doctor he had quit. On my first day, Walter gave me a tour. Rooms 1 through 16 are on this side, he said. We walked past the office. Rooms 18 through 22 are around the corner. Then he stopped. I looked at him. Where's 17? Walter stared at the hallway. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, That one stays locked. I laughed. Renovation? No. Plumbing problem? No. He took a key from his pocket. Just don't open it. That was all he said. Naturally, I wanted to know why, but Walter walked away. I assumed it was an old storage room. Maybe something embarrassing had happened there. Maybe there was mold. Maybe somebody had died. Hotels have stories. I didn't think much about it. Until the night the rain came. It was one of those Pennsylvania storms that seemed to swallow the entire highway. Rain slammed against the windows. Thunder shook the motel sign. At around 1:40 a.m., a couple checked in. A man and a woman. The man looked about 30. The woman looked younger. They were exhausted. The man handed me his driver's license. Room 9, I said. He paid cash. Then he asked, Is the pool open? I almost laughed. In this weather? He smiled. Fair point. They walked away. I watched them disappear down the hallway. Then I heard something, a faint metallic sound. Click. I looked toward the end of the building. Room 17. The door was open. I stood up. I was sure it had been locked. I walked closer. The hallway lights flickered above me. Room 17 was completely dark. I stopped outside. Hello? No answer. I pushed the door slightly. It opened another inch. Inside was an old room covered in dust. The bed was still there. The curtains were yellow. A broken lamp sat beside the nightstand. And on the wall, there were children's drawings. Dozens of them. I stepped inside. One drawing caught my attention. It showed a little girl standing beside a motel. Above her was written, Me and Daddy. I felt something tighten in my chest, because underneath the drawing, someone had written a date. October 14th, 1998. I was staring at it when the door behind me slammed shut. I jumped. I turned around. The room was empty. Then I heard a little girl's voice, very softly, from inside the bathroom. Are you my daddy? I ran. I don't remember closing the door. I don't remember locking it. I just remember sprinting back to the front desk. I sat down and tried to breathe. A few minutes later, Walter walked in through the back entrance. He looked at me. Then he looked toward room 17. You opened it. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Walter's face changed. He looked genuinely afraid. Did you hear anything? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, "A little girl." Walter closed his eyes. For several seconds, he didn't move. Finally, he whispered, "Her name was Emily." Emily had been 8 years old. Her father, Daniel Miller, had worked as a truck driver. In October 1998, Daniel stopped at Pine Hollow with Emily during a road trip. They were supposed to stay one night. They never left. The official story was that Daniel murdered his daughter and then disappeared. Police found Emily's body 3 days later in room 17. Daniel was never found. No weapon was ever recovered. No vehicle was ever found. And the strangest part? The room had been locked from the inside. Walter told me that after the investigation, the motel reopened. But guests started complaining. They heard a child crying. They heard footsteps. They heard someone knocking on the bathroom door. Eventually, Walter stopped renting the room. "Why didn't you demolish it?" I asked. He looked at me. "Because every time we tried..." He paused. "The workers heard her." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" Walter looked toward the hallway. "They said she kept asking the same question." "What question?" He whispered. "Where's my daddy?" I wanted to quit. That night, right there. But Walter offered me extra money. A lot of extra money, and I needed it. So I stayed. For the next week, nothing happened. Then came Friday. At 2:13 a.m., the phone at the front desk rang. I answered. Front desk. Silence. Then a little girl's voice. "Can you tell my daddy I'm ready?" My blood turned cold. I hung up. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. It rang a third time, then stopped. I stared at the receiver. 5 seconds later, room 17's door opened. Slowly. I could see the darkness inside from the front desk. Then something rolled across the hallway, a small red ball. It stopped directly at my feet. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Because I remembered the children's drawings, and I remembered something else. One of them had shown Emily holding a red ball. I backed away. Then I heard footsteps, tiny footsteps, coming toward me. Step, step, step. They stopped right in front of the desk, but nobody was there. Then the computer monitor flickered. The motel reservation system opened by itself. A new reservation appeared. Room 17. Guest, Daniel Miller. Check-in October 14th, 1998. Check-out, never. I stared at the screen. Then another line appeared. Second guest, Emily Miller, and beneath it, status, waiting. I called Walter. He arrived 20 minutes later. When he saw the screen, he didn't say anything. I asked him, what really happened that night? He sat down. For the first time since I'd met him, Walter looked old, much older. He told me the police had been wrong. Daniel hadn't killed Emily. Daniel had actually tried to save her. That night, Emily had disappeared from the room. Daniel searched the motel. He heard her crying from the bathroom. When he opened the door, Emily was gone. But the bathroom window was locked. Daniel called the police. Before they arrived, he told Walter something terrifying. Emily wasn't the only one in the room. There was someone else, a man, someone Daniel said he had seen standing in the mirror. The police never believed him. 3 days later, Emily was found dead. Daniel disappeared. But Walter had kept one thing secret. A security camera had recorded the hallway that night. The footage showed Daniel running from room 17 at 2:13 a.m. He was carrying something, a small red ball. Then he stopped, turned around, and looked directly at the camera. His lips moved. The police couldn't hear the audio. But Walter had watched the footage hundreds of times. He knew exactly what Daniel had said. "She's not my daughter anymore." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I searched the internet for Daniel Miller. I found an old newspaper article. There was a photograph, Daniel, Emily, and behind them, Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. I stared at Emily's face. Something felt familiar. Not her face. Her eyes. They reminded me of someone. I opened an old photograph on my phone, a picture of my mother. Then I looked at Emily again. My mother had once told me something strange when I was a child. She said she'd stayed at a motel in Pennsylvania when she was young. She never told me the name. I had forgotten about it. Until then, I called her old sister. My aunt answered. I asked her about the trip. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Sonny, your mother didn't go to Pennsylvania alone." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" She whispered, "She went with your father." My father had disappeared when I was 5. I had always been told he abandoned us. But my aunt told me something else. He had been a truck driver, and in 1998, he had stopped at Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. I returned to the motel that night. I confronted Walter. He looked at me and immediately understood. "You know," he said, "you knew my father." Walter didn't answer. I grabbed his jacket. "What happened to him?" He looked toward room 17. Then he said, "Your father was Daniel Miller." Everything inside me went silent. I shook my head. "No." Walter's eyes filled with tears. "Emily wasn't your father's daughter." I stared at him. "She was your sister." I couldn't breathe. My mother had been pregnant with me. My father had been traveling with Emily. And the night Emily disappeared, my father tried to save her. But whatever was inside room 17 took him too. My mother had been waiting for him to come home. He never did. And nobody ever told her the truth, because Walter had promised my father something. If Daniel didn't return, Walter would protect the motel and never let anyone open room 17 again. At 2:13 that night, the phone rang. I answered. This time, it was my father's voice. "Son?" I couldn't speak. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I started crying. "Where are you?" A long silence. Then, behind the bathroom wall, the line went dead. I ran to room 17. Walter followed me. We broke through the old bathroom wall. Behind it was a narrow space, and inside, we found a suitcase. My father's suitcase. There was a photograph. Emily was holding the red ball. My father was standing behind her, and on the back of the photograph were 5 words. "Don't let her see me." Suddenly, the bathroom mirror cracked. A little girl's reflection appeared. Emily. She was smiling. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking behind me. I slowly turned. My father was standing in the doorway. He looked exactly like he had in the old photograph. Older, tired, terrified. He whispered, "Don't answer her." Then Emily's voice came from the bathroom. "Daddy?" My father closed his eyes. "Don't answer." The voice came again. "Daddy?" Then the lights went out, and something grabbed my father's shoulder. He screamed. I reached for him, but my hand passed straight through his body. Before he disappeared, he looked at me one last time. "Tell your mother." He paused. I came home. Then he was gone. The police came the next morning. They searched the motel. They found nothing. Walter refused to explain. I quit my job. Pine Hollow closed 6 months later. Walter died the following winter. Room 17 was eventually demolished. Or at least, that's what the records say. Because 3 years later, I received an envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. But the photograph had been taken recently. The motel sign was still there. The building looked exactly the same. And room 17's window was visible. Standing behind the glass was Emily, holding her red ball. On the back of the photograph were 6 words. "Your mother is still waiting." I burned the photograph. I moved to another state. I never returned to Pennsylvania. But sometimes, at exactly 2:13 in the morning, my phone rings. I never answer, because I know who's calling. And last night, for the first time, I heard my mother's voice on the voicemail. She said only one thing. "Your father came home." Then a little girl's voice whispered behind her, "Now it's your turn." Story 2. I used to think the worst thing that could happen at a motel was finding a dead body in one of the rooms. I was wrong. The worst thing is finding a room that officially doesn't exist, and hearing someone inside it ask you to open the door. My name is Daniel Mercer. In October 2019, I took a night shift job at a small roadside motel in northern Pennsylvania called the Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. It sat beside an old highway surrounded by pine trees, about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The place was cheap, outdated, and almost always half empty. Exactly what I needed. After my younger sister, Emily, died in a car accident, I had stopped caring much about where I lived. I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody knew me. The motel manager, an old man named Walter, hired me after a 10-minute interview. He showed me the front desk, the security cameras, the laundry room, and a tiny office behind reception. Then he gave me 3 rules. First, he said, never leave the front desk unattended between midnight and 5. Second, if room 14 calls, don't answer. I laughed. Why? Walter didn't. And third, he looked toward the hallway behind me. If you hear a child crying outside after 2 a.m., don't go looking for it. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. My first few nights were completely normal. Truckers checked in, couples stopped for a few hours. Occasionally, someone complained about the heating. Then came Thursday night. At 2:13 a.m., the front desk phone rang. I looked at the caller display. Room 14. I froze. Walter's warning immediately came back to me. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. Again. Again. Then it stopped. I breathed out. 5 seconds later, someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. I looked through the glass. Nobody was there. I checked the parking lot cameras. Empty. Then I heard a little girl's voice from the other side of the door. Please, she sounded terrified. Please let me in. Every hair on my arm stood up. I didn't move. The girl knocked again. My mom can't find me. I almost opened the door. Almost. Then I noticed something on the security monitor. The camera facing the front entrance showed the parking lot clearly. There was nobody outside. But the camera facing the motel hallway showed something much worse. A little girl was standing at the end of the corridor, barefoot, wearing a yellow raincoat. Her face was turned toward the wall. I stared at the screen. Then she slowly turned her head toward the camera. The image flickered. The screen went black. When it came back, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I asked Walter about room 14. His face changed immediately. There is no room 14. I pointed toward the hallway. Of course there is. Rooms 10 through 16 are back there. Walter shook his head. Checked the keys. I opened the key cabinet. Room 13, room 15. There was no 14. I thought it was some stupid renovation issue, until I found an old motel map in the office. Rooms 10, 11, 12, then 15. No 14. There was never supposed to be a room 14. That afternoon, I searched through old newspapers online, and that's when I found the story. 23 years earlier, in 1996, a 9-year-old girl named Megan Bell disappeared from Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. Her mother had checked into room 14 during a thunderstorm. According to the newspaper, Megan disappeared sometime between 1:30 and 2 a.m. Police searched the entire property. They found nothing. The strangest part? Room 14 had been sealed off after the disappearance. Nobody ever explained why. I looked at the date, October 17th, 1996, exactly 23 years before my night shift. That evening, I confronted Walter. He finally told me the truth. The motel was built in 1984, he said. Room 14 was originally a storage room. Then why did Megan's mother stay there? Walter looked exhausted. Because the owner illegally converted it into a guest room. What happened to Megan? Walter stared at the floor. Nobody knows. Then he whispered something that made my stomach drop. Her mother kept saying Megan was still inside. That night, I decided to investigate. At 2:07 a.m., I took a flashlight and walked down the hallway. There were rooms 13 and 15. Between them was a blank section of wall. I ran my fingers across it. Cold air came through a tiny crack. Then, I heard knocking from behind the wall. 3 knocks. I stepped back. 3 more. Then the little girl's voice. Daniel? I had never told anyone my name. I ran back to the front desk. The phone was ringing. Room 14. This time I answered. I didn't speak. A little girl whispered through the receiver. She told me you would come. Who? My mom. I couldn't breathe. Then Megan said something else. Daniel, she's still here. The call ended. At that exact moment, the front doors unlocked by themselves, and every light in the motel went out. I grabbed my flashlight. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. Bare feet against the carpet. Coming from the hallway. I pointed the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. Then I heard a woman whisper behind me. Where is my daughter? I turned. Nobody. But the office door was open. Inside, something had been written on the dusty wall. 4 words. She never left the room. I called the police. Before they arrived, I searched the old storage area behind the laundry room. There was a loose wooden panel behind a dryer. Inside was a small metal box. And inside that box was Megan's yellow raincoat. Under it was a cassette tape. I found an old player in the office. The tape was labeled October 17th, 1996, 2:14 a.m. I pressed play. Static. Then a man's voice. The motel owner. He was whispering. I told her to stop screaming. My blood went cold. The recording continued. I didn't mean to hurt the girl. Then I heard a little girl crying and another voice. Megan's mother. Please. She's my daughter. The motel owner shouted. Then there was a loud crash. The tape ended. I stood there shaking. Then I noticed something behind me. A reflection in the office window. The little girl in the yellow raincoat was standing behind me. I slowly turned. She was there. Only now I could see her face. She wasn't bloody. She wasn't burned. She simply looked sad. She pointed toward the hallway. She's waiting. Who? Megan pointed behind me. Mom. I turned around. The hallway was empty. Then every motel door slammed shut at once. Bang, bang, bang. Room 13, room 15. Then the blank wall between them. A door appeared. Room 14. The number was crooked and covered in dust. I should have run. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a motel room frozen in 1996. Old wallpaper, an ancient television, a suitcase on the bed, and photographs covering the walls. Photographs of Megan, hundreds of them. Then I saw one photograph that made my heart stop. It was dated October 17th, 1996. Megan was standing outside the motel. Beside her was my sister Emily. I dropped the photograph. Emily had been born in 1997. She couldn't have been there. Then I heard Megan whisper, "Your sister knows." I backed away. Knows what? The television turned on by itself. Static filled the room. Then an image appeared. My sister, sitting inside a car, crying. I recognized the location immediately, the same stretch of highway where Emily died. But there was something in the passenger seat. A little girl in a yellow raincoat. Megan. The screen went black. And suddenly I understood. Emily's accident hadn't been an accident. She had been driving home that night when she saw something on the road. A little girl. Emily had stopped. She had tried to help her, and somehow, Megan had followed her. For 23 years. The room began shaking. The walls cracked, and Megan appeared directly in front of me. She looked at me and said, "Your sister brought me home." Then she smiled. "Now you have to finish it." Behind me, the door slammed shut, and a woman's voice whispered from the darkness, "Daniel." I turned. It was my sister, Emily. She looked exactly the way I remembered her. For a moment, I forgot I was afraid. I stepped toward her. "Emily," she smiled. "I've been waiting for you." I started crying. Then I noticed something. Emily's feet weren't touching the floor, and her eyes were completely black. She whispered, "Don't open the door." I looked toward room 14. The door was slowly opening. Megan was standing outside, and behind her was the motel owner from the 1996 recording. His face was twisted with rage. Emily grabbed my arm. "He's the reason we're still here," the motel owner screamed. The room exploded into darkness. I remember running. I remember breaking through the front entrance. I remember police cars arriving. But when they searched the motel, there was no room 14, no yellow raincoat, no cassette, no photographs, nothing. Walter disappeared that same night. The motel closed permanently 2 weeks later. I never went back. But 3 years later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Pine Hollow Motor Lodge. The photograph had been taken at night. Every room was dark, except one, room 14. And standing behind the window was Megan. Beside her was Emily. Both of them were looking directly at the camera. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "You forgot to lock the door." I burned the photograph. At least I thought I did, because sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I pass an old motel, and I see a yellow raincoat standing beside the road. I never stop. I never look back. But last month at exactly 2:14 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Room 14." I didn't answer. The voicemail came 5 minutes later. It was my sister's voice. She sounded frightened, and she said only 6 words. "Daniel, she's outside your house." I live alone. There is no motel near my house. But as I'm writing this, someone is knocking on my front door. 3 slow knocks. And a little girl is whispering from the other side, "Please, let me in." Story 3. I still remember the first time I saw room 17. It was 2:13 a.m. on a freezing November night in Wyoming, and I was driving alone on Interstate 80. My name is Ethan Miller. Back then, I was 29, working as a regional delivery driver and spending most nights behind the wheel. That night, a snowstorm had closed part of the highway ahead of me. My phone had 8% battery, my gas tank was almost empty, and the nearest town was supposedly 30 miles away. Then I saw the sign. Cedar Pines Motel. Vacancy. 1 mile. The sign flickered through the snow. I almost drove past it, but then my engine began making a strange clicking noise, so I turned. The motel was hidden behind a row of dead pine trees. There were only 2 buildings, a tiny office, and 17 rooms. The strange thing was, I couldn't remember seeing it on the highway map. I parked outside the office and walked in. An old man was sitting behind the counter. He looked to be in his 70s. He stared at me for several seconds before saying, "You're late." I laughed nervously. "Late for what?" He didn't smile. "Room 17. I looked toward the hallway. "Do you have anything else?" "No." He slid a brass key across the counter. The tag said 17. I paid cash. Before I left, the old man grabbed my wrist. His hand was surprisingly strong. "If you hear someone knocking after 3 a.m., don't open the door." I smiled awkwardly. "Okay." He didn't let go. "I'm serious." Then he released me. I carried my bag to room 17. The room looked ordinary. 2 beds, a television, a bathroom, a small heater, nothing unusual, except for one photograph hanging above the bed. It showed the motel. The picture looked old, maybe from the 1980s. There were several people standing outside. A woman, a little girl, a young man, and an older man who looked exactly like the person sitting in the office. I got closer. Then I noticed something. Room 17's window was visible in the photograph, and someone was standing behind it. A little girl. I stared at her face. She looked terrified. I convinced myself it was just an old photograph. I turned on the television. There was no signal. I checked my phone. No service. Then the heater suddenly stopped. The room became completely silent. I looked at the clock. 2:47 a.m. That's when I heard a noise. 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. Then I remembered what the old man had said. "Don't open the door after 3 o'clock." I looked at the clock again. 2:49. "Probably another guest," I whispered. The knocking stopped. I went into the bathroom. While brushing my teeth, I heard a little girl's voice from the bedroom. Mom, I dropped my toothbrush. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the voice came again. Mom, please. I slowly walked out. The room was empty. The television was still off. The door was locked. I checked underneath the bed. Nothing. I told myself I was exhausted. Maybe the voice had come from outside. Then I noticed something on the floor. A child's red hair ribbon. I picked it up. It was wet and freezing cold. At exactly 3 a.m., someone knocked. This time it wasn't 3 knocks. It was one, then another, then another. Slowly, like whoever was outside was counting. I stood beside the door. Who's there? Silence. Then a girl's voice whispered, "Please, let me in." My heart started pounding. I stepped backward. The voice continued, "He's looking for me." I didn't answer. "Please." Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The voice changed. It became a man's voice. My father's voice. My father had been dead for 6 years. "Ethan?" I covered my mouth. "Ethan, open the door." I knew that voice. I knew it perfectly. I backed away from the door. The handle began turning. Slowly. But the deadbolt held. Then suddenly, everything stopped. I waited. Nothing. At 3:17 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. They walked past my room, stopped, then walked back, stopped again. Then someone whispered through the door, "You're not supposed to be here." I stayed awake until sunrise. At 6:30, I opened the door. The hallway was empty. I rushed to the office. The old man was there. I slammed the key onto the counter. "What is this place?" He looked at me. "You heard her." "Who?" He sighed. "Her name was Emily." I stared at him. "Who was Emily?" He looked toward the motel rooms. "She was my granddaughter." Then he told me the story. In 1987, the motel belonged to his son, Daniel. Daniel had a 9-year-old daughter named Emily. One winter night, Emily disappeared. They searched for hours. They found her 3 days later, not far from the motel. She was dead. The official report said she had wandered into the woods and died from exposure. But the old man said that wasn't true. Emily had been afraid of someone. She had told her father that a man was coming into her room at night. Nobody believed her, until the night she disappeared. The old man looked at me. Her room was 17. I felt cold. But this motel has 17 rooms. He nodded. It used to have 18. I didn't understand. What happened to the 18th room? He stared at the floor. After Emily died, we sealed it. Why? Because we found something behind the wall. What? He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local girl found dead near Cedar Pines Motel." Below the headline was a photograph. Emily, the same little girl from the photograph in my room. But there was something else. On the back of the clipping, someone had written, "She didn't die outside." I looked at the old man. "Who wrote this?" He whispered. "Emily." I laughed nervously. "That's impossible." "I know." He pointed toward the hallway. "That's why the room is still there." I didn't want to hear anything else. I grabbed my bag. "I'm leaving." He didn't stop me. As I walked toward my car, I looked back at room 17. The curtains were moving. There was someone standing behind them, a little girl. I got inside my car and started the engine. The engine worked perfectly. I drove away. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. I checked into another hotel. I told myself everything was over. But at 8:12 that morning, someone knocked on my door. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A little girl whispered, "You're in my room." The call ended. I immediately checked the room number. 17. I packed my things and left. For months, I convinced myself it was some kind of elaborate prank. I searched online for Cedar Pines Motel. Nothing. No website, no reviews, no address, nothing. Then, almost a year later, I found the newspaper article again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a second photograph. It showed the motel in 1987. Standing outside were 6 people. Emily, her father, her grandfather, 2 police officers, and a young delivery driver. I stared at the photograph. The delivery driver was me. Same face, same jacket, same scar above my eyebrow. But I was 29 years old in the picture, and the photograph had been taken 39 years earlier. I contacted the newspaper. They told me the photograph had been recovered from police evidence. The motel had burned down in 1988. No motel existed there anymore. I drove back to Wyoming. I found the location. There were no buildings, only a burned foundation surrounded by trees. But there was one thing lying in the snow, a brass key. I picked it up. The tag said 17. I threw it away. Then I heard a little girl behind me. "Thank you for coming back." I turned. Nobody was there. I looked down. The key was back in my hand. That night, I finally understood what Emily had been trying to tell me. She wasn't asking me to let her in. She was asking me to find out who had locked her inside. And 3 weeks later, investigators reopened the old case. They found human remains beneath the original motel foundation. Not Emily, a man's remains. The police eventually identified him as a former motel employee who had disappeared shortly before Emily's death. The official theory changed. Emily hadn't wandered into the woods. She had been hiding from him, and someone had locked her inside room 18, the room that no longer existed, the room that had been sealed behind the wall. The old man died 2 days after the investigation began. Before he died, he gave the police one final statement. He said that on the night Emily disappeared, he had heard her screaming from room 18, but he was too afraid to open the door. He left her there, and he had lived with that guilt for 39 years. As for me, I never drove through Wyoming again, at least not at night. But sometimes when I'm driving alone, my GPS suddenly loses signal. The screen goes black, and for a few seconds a motel appears on the map. Cedar Pines Motel, 1 mile ahead. Every time it happens, I pull over, because I know something now. There are only 17 rooms, but sometimes someone still needs a place to stay. And if you ever find yourself driving through Wyoming late at night and you see a flickering sign that says vacancy, keep driving. Because if the clerk behind the counter already knows your name and he hands you a brass key marked 17, don't take it. Whatever you hear knocking, whatever voice calls your name, do not open the door. Because some rooms aren't haunted by the dead. They're haunted by the people who were never allowed to leave. Story 4. I used to think the worst thing that could happen to you at a motel was finding a dead bug under your pillow. Then I spent one night at the Pine Hollow Motor Inn, and now whenever I see a motel sign glowing beside an empty highway, I keep driving. This happened in October of 2022, somewhere outside Ely, Nevada. I was 31 years old and driving from Salt Lake City to Sacramento after my mother died. I hadn't planned to stop that night. I was supposed to keep driving until I reached California, but around 11:40 p.m., my car started overheating. The temperature gauge climbed into the red, and steam began pouring from underneath the hood. There wasn't a town for miles, just desert, a 2-lane highway, and darkness so complete that my headlights seemed to disappear into it. I pulled onto the shoulder and called roadside assistance. The woman on the phone told me a tow truck could take at least 2 hours. Then she said something that I still remember. "There's a motel about 3 miles ahead, Pine Hollow Motor Inn. You can walk there if you need somewhere warm." I looked down the highway. There was no motel sign, no streetlights, nothing. Still, I grabbed my backpack and started walking. About 20 minutes later, I saw it. A small red neon sign flickering through the darkness. Pine Hollow Motor Inn. The motel looked like it had been forgotten sometime in the 1980s. One long building, 8 rooms, a tiny office, an empty swimming pool, and a parking lot with only one vehicle in it. An old white Buick. I walked into the office. A bell sat on the counter. I pressed it. Nothing. I pressed it again. A few seconds later, an elderly man appeared from a hallway behind the desk. He was probably in his 70s, thin, gray hair, pale blue eyes. He looked at me for several seconds without saying anything. Then he asked, "Which room?" "I don't know. I just need a room for the night." He stared at me. Then he reached underneath the desk. 17. I frowned. 17? He handed me a key. Room 17. The key had a small metal tag attached to it. I glanced toward the motel. There were only 8 doors. I counted them twice. "Excuse me," I said. "Where's room 17? The old man pointed toward the far end of the building. "Last door." I walked outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There were only 8 rooms. I turned around. The old man was standing in the doorway of the office, watching me. "Sir," I called, "there are only 8 rooms." He didn't answer. He simply said, "Don't open the door if someone knocks." Then he went inside. I should have left. I know that now. But I was exhausted. My phone had 12% battery. My car was 3 miles away, and there was nowhere else to go. So I walked to the end of the motel. There was a narrow passage between the building and an old wooden fence. I followed it, and that's when I saw the door. It was hidden behind the corner of the building. No number, no room sign. Just a single door underneath a yellow security light. I inserted the key. The lock clicked. Inside was a small motel room. 2 beds, a television, a bathroom, a wooden dresser. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. There was a child's drawing taped above the bed. It showed a family standing outside a motel. A mother, a father, and a little girl. Underneath them, written in purple crayon, were the words, "We are waiting for Daddy." I stood there for a long time. Something about the picture bothered me. The little girl had drawn herself without a face. I put my backpack down and tried to forget about it. Around midnight, I called the tow company. The truck wouldn't arrive until morning, so I decided to sleep. At 1:13 a.m., someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. Then I remembered the old man's warning. Don't open the door. I stayed silent. A few seconds passed. Then I heard a little girl's voice. "Daddy?" My entire body went cold. "Daddy, are you awake?" I didn't move. The voice came again. "You said you'd come back." I whispered, "I'm not your daddy." Silence. Then something scratched the bottom of the door. Slowly. From one side to the other. I backed away. The scratching stopped. And then I heard footsteps running away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At sunrise, I rushed into the motel office. The old man was sitting behind the desk, drinking coffee. I slammed the key onto the counter. "What the hell is wrong with this place?" He looked at me. "She talked to you?" I stared at him. "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "What did she say?" I told him. The old man closed his eyes. Then he whispered, "She still thinks her father is coming back." I didn't understand. He finally told me the story. 24 years earlier, Pine Hollow had been owned by a man named Daniel Mercer. Daniel lived there with his wife, Rebecca, and their 9-year-old daughter, Emily. One winter night, Daniel got into an argument with Rebecca. He packed a bag and left. Emily ran after him. She stood outside room 17 and begged him not to go. Daniel promised her he'd return the next morning. He never did. Rebecca blamed herself. 3 days later, she and Emily disappeared. Police searched the property. They found Rebecca's car abandoned behind the motel, but they never found either of them. The motel eventually closed. Years later, the old man reopened it. His name was Walter. He had been Daniel's younger brother. I stared at him. "So what happened to Emily?" Walter looked toward the window. "We don't know." "Then who's knocking on my door?" He didn't answer. I lowered my voice. "Where is room 17? Walter looked directly at me. "It doesn't exist." My stomach dropped. "What?" "There are only 8 rooms." "Then where did I sleep?" Walter's face had gone pale. "You slept in the room where Emily disappeared." I stepped away from the counter. "Why would you give me that room?" "I didn't." He pointed at the key lying on the counter. "I haven't had a key for room 17 in 20 years. I looked down. The key was gone. In its place was a small purple crayon. I left the motel immediately. The tow truck arrived 40 minutes later. Before I got into my car, I looked back at the motel. The neon sign was gone. The building looked abandoned. Broken windows, faded walls, weeds growing through the parking lot. There was no office, no cars, no elderly man, nothing. I thought I had imagined everything until I reached Sacramento. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed the Pine Hollow Motor Inn. The picture looked old, maybe 20 years old. On the back, someone had written, "You slept in her room." I turned the photograph over again. There was something else in it. A little girl standing outside room 17. Emily. Her face was scratched out, but behind her, reflected in the motel window, was a man. I recognized him immediately. It was me, standing behind Emily, wearing the same jacket I had worn that night. I couldn't breathe. I called the police. They told me the photograph was probably a prank, so I put it away. I tried to move on. For almost a year, nothing happened. Then one night, I woke up at exactly 1:13 a.m. 3 knocks came from my apartment door. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Then I heard a little girl's voice. "Daddy?" I sat upright in bed. The voice came again. "You said you'd come back." I looked toward the bedroom door. Underneath it, something purple slowly appeared. A child's drawing. I pulled the door open. There was nobody there. Just the drawing lying on the floor. It showed a motel, a mother, a father, a little girl. And this time, the little girl had a face. My face. Underneath the picture were 5 words. "Room 17 is waiting for you." I moved out of that apartment the next morning. I changed my phone number. I even sold my car. I convinced myself that whatever happened at Pine Hollow was finished. But 3 months ago, I received another photograph. This one was different. It wasn't of the motel. It was of my mother's house. The house where I grew up. The house she had died in. In the photograph, my mother was standing beside the front door. And next to her was Emily, the little girl from room 17. On the back of the photograph was a message. "Your mother knew why you were there." That was when I finally understood something. My mother had never wanted me to drive to California. She had been sick for months before she died. A week before her death, she told me something I didn't understand. She said, "If you ever see a red motel sign in the desert, don't stop." I thought it was medication. I thought she was confused. She wasn't, because the last thing I found in her house was an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local girl disappears from Pine Hollow Motel." The date was October 17th, 1998. The article included a photograph of Emily, and beneath it was another photograph. Daniel Mercer, her father. I stared at the picture. Then I noticed something. Daniel was wearing a black jacket, the exact same jacket my father had worn when he disappeared when I was 6 years old. My father hadn't abandoned us. He had been Daniel Mercer. And my mother had spent 24 years hiding the truth from me. That night I drove back toward Nevada. I don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe anger, maybe because some part of me knew I had never really left. I found the highway. I found the desert. And just before midnight, I saw it. A red neon sign, flickering in the darkness. Pine Hollow Motor Inn. This time there were 17 rooms. I counted them. 17. At the end of the building stood room 17. The door was already open. Inside, Emily was sitting on the bed. She looked exactly 9 years old. She looked at me and smiled. "You came back." I couldn't speak. She pointed toward the bathroom. I walked inside. There was a mirror above the sink. Written across it in purple crayon were 3 words. "Ask your father." Then I heard a man's voice behind me. My father's voice. The voice I hadn't heard since I was 6. "Son?" I slowly turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway. Older, much older, but unmistakably my father. He looked at me and started crying. "I'm sorry. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked the only question I had carried my entire life. Why did you leave us?" My father looked toward Emily. "I didn't." He pointed at the little girl. "She wouldn't let me." Emily smiled. Then the lights went out. The last thing I heard was my father's voice whispering, "Don't let her know you're leaving." And then the motel door slammed shut. I was found 3 days later beside my car on the highway. According to the police, the Pine Hollow Motor Inn had burned down in 1999. There had never been a Room 17. There was never an owner named Walter. And according to official records, Emily Mercer was never found. But there is one thing the police couldn't explain. In my car, they found a motel key. Old, rusty, with a metal tag attached. 17. I still have that key. I keep it locked inside a box. And every October 17th, at exactly 1:13 a.m., I hear 3 knocks on my front door. I never answer. Because last year, after the 3rd knock, Emily whispered something through the door. Something I had never heard before. She said, "Daddy isn't here anymore." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "But you are." And since that night, I've started hearing footsteps inside my house. Slow footsteps coming from the hallway, stopping outside my bedroom, every single night. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear a little girl laughing right beside my bed. The worst part? Yesterday morning, I found a new purple crayon drawing taped to my bedroom wall. It showed me standing outside Room 17. Emily was holding my hand. And behind us was another little boy, a boy I had never seen before. Underneath the picture were 6 words, "He's the one who comes next." I don't have children, I never have. So I don't know who that little boy is. But tonight, someone is knocking again. 3 times, knock, knock, knock. And this time, there is a man's voice outside my door, my father's voice. He's whispering, "Son, open the door. I brought your sister home.